All right, welcome everyone. Thank you so much for joining us here today. My name is Mark Howden. I'm the Director of Solution Innovation here at Samsung. And today, I'm really excited about this session. I've been waiting all week for this. It's a session where we're going to talk about a lot of the technological innovations that we've been working on with our partnership between Medtronic and Samsung. So with me today from Medtronic, we have Earl Slee. He's the Vice President of Technology Strategy and Business Development. We have Jim Willenbring, the Senior Director for Digital Health, and John Wilson, Program Manager for Digital Connectivity for Mobile Devices. So thank you so much for being here today. So before we launch into this, we're going to be getting into a few of the really innovative solutions that Medtronic has developed and we've partnered with Samsung technology. I just want to talk a little bit about Medtronic, Samsung, and where we are today. So Medtronic is a global leader in medical technology, and Samsung provides a platform of connectivity, management, and security. So together, we've been able to provide the best quality of life for medical care, in many cases, for a lot of different patients around the world. So that started. I want to start off talking about one of the amazing Medtronic innovations, deep brain stimulation therapy. So before I get started, though, I'd like to introduce Susan. Anyone who was at the keynote this morning would recognize Susan. Susan is a recipient of the deep brain stimulation therapy for Parkinson's, and she has an amazing story, and you saw some of it this morning, and she's going to be able to elaborate more on that today. So, but where I'd like to start off, before we get into your story, Susan, is Earl. I'd like to ask you just to talk about the healthcare need that Medtronic saw for this solution, and then how it led to Medtronic decision to develop this deep brain stimulation therapy.
Sure, thank you, Mark. And excuse me, welcome everyone. Medtronic, a little background if you weren't in the keynote, Medtronic is the largest medical technology company in the world. We're over $30 billion in revenue, over $2 billion in annual R&D expenditure. We have 90,000 employees all over the world. We're in over 160 countries around the world. And Medtronic was founded 70 years ago, focused on cardiac pacemakers. And a pacemaker looks similar to this. It's implanted in the pectoral area of the brain, and it contains a battery and microelectronics that can deliver electrical stimulation to a lead that's placed into the heart. So if you have bradycardia, slow heartbeat, we can beat that at a steady cadence that will keep you healthy and feeling a little bit better. Medtronic has been in deep brain stimulation for almost 25 years. It was a natural extension for us with our capabilities and expertise with implantable technology, microelectronics batteries, to run a lead up into the brain and into a very precise location in the brain called the subthalamic nucleus, or STN, is the most common target. It's quite small. It's about the size of an almond, and you have to place this lead precisely in that location to have the benefit. Once we're there, we're able to deliver electrical stimulation, and that modulates the symptoms that patients are seeing. So Mark, if you can run the video, what you'll see here in the video is a couple different patients that are exhibiting stimulation on and stimulation off. So on the right side here, you'll see Gary with the DBS therapy on. You can see how calm he is, how he can touch his fingers together in the clinic under the doctor's orders. And on the left, the doctor has turned the stimulation off. And this can be a normal checkup where they come into the office and they see how they're doing, how their disease is progressing over time. You can imagine the impact of this on a patient's quality of life. I mean, in terms of Gary here in the picture, where the movements like that, it's difficult for him to walk. You'll see him attempting to walk, and he needs 2 assistants in the picture on the left, where on the right, he can walk under his own power, okay? So the ability to take care of yourself, to button your shirt, to feed yourself, and other things are very important quality of life metrics. So that's the effect that this type of therapy has on patients. But we have a patient here today, in Susan, who you may have seen earlier. And, but Susan, maybe you could describe for the audience your journey and what it was like before you had this device and what it's like afterwards.
Okay. First, I want to thank Samsung for having me here today to tell my story, and for Samsung and Medtronic coming together in making the new programmer. When I was diagnosed with Parkinson's, I was the dean of students at a public high school in New Hampshire, and I used to say, no 2 days are the same. One day I walked in not having Parkinson's. I left that afternoon knowing I had Parkinson's, and it was devastating. I want to thank somebody else, my husband, Stephen. We were both divorced at that time. We had been dating about a year, and I called him over to my house, and I said, I've been seeing the doctor, but I didn't let you know. And I was diagnosed today with Parkinson's, and I'm going to give you your out. And he said, I'm not going anywhere. So 8 years later, we're married. When I would walk into school, I felt like I was walking in sideways, like I was intoxicated, and I used to feel embarrassed. I used to have my trimming hands in my pockets, or I would stand like this. And one day a student asked me, you look so defensive. And then I told them. I felt that the staff was going to feel that I was not qualified anymore to do my job. My right hand became rigid, so I used to carry it across my midsection, and my hands would curl into a claw. That's what I called it. I could barely write my own name even. I had a hard time using the computer. I used to bound up the stairs chasing a student 3 at a time, and now I could only trip on them. I was on a lot of meds and getting used to the meds, and I used to fall asleep in meetings. So that was life before. Since DBS, the tremor has stopped. That's my right hand, which would look almost like that man in the video. My claw is now a New England lobster dinner on my plate instead of a claw in my hand. My use of the computer improved, but fine motor skills still are a challenge. Biggest thing, I decreased my medicine by 40%. And there is a fine line between what is therapeutic and what is toxic. One thing you want to know about Parkinson's is there are a lot of people that become depressed with Parkinson's. And that's not talked about a lot. And since the DBS, I don't have the outward signs of Parkinson's, and that makes me feel better about myself.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you.
And can you talk a little bit about the communication with the programmer?
Yes. You?
Yeah.
Oh.
Absolutely.
Okay.
That'd be great.
I'd be
Thank
glad
you.
to cover that. So, our devices, our Medtronic devices, DBS devices, and other devices as well, can be tailored very specifically, to the patient's condition, and when patients come into the clinic, the doctor will do that. About a year ago, we essentially launched some software applications running on a Samsung tablet that allows neurologists to be able to adjust, those parameters, those characteristics of those devices as well. And so that fine-tuning happens in the clinic, and then it also can happen with the patient as well. And so they get essentially a Samsung handset now, and that's what we essentially announced today, what Earl talked about this morning at the keynote session, is that ability for the patient to have a device that allows them to be able to see the status of what their device is, and then be able to do some adjustments, turn it off, turn it back on again, and some patients can have some ability to be able to take that stimulation up and down as well, based on what kind of parameters the physician sets, and is able to do that. So, and the device essentially is, in a nice little case here. You'll see the handset is on the left-hand side, and then there's a communicator device like this, because essentially the handset has Bluetooth in it, of course. It communicates to this device through Bluetooth. And then in the implantable device, we have a kind of proprietary communication, radio frequency communication, that this device translates all of the information back and forth. So it kind of stands in the middle to be able to translate that. So those are the different components of that system. And so as we worked with Samsung on these applications, we needed to be able to include this piece of hardware as well, this communication device, so that it worked with the system as well.
That's great. Well, thank you. Looking at you today, Susan, it's hard to imagine how hard it must have been back then, and it's incredible innovation. We actually have another patient video that I'd like to show. Really demonstrates a lot of what Jim was just talking about with the technology. So I'll let this run.
On a continent, in a country famous for its wide open spaces and wild animals,
Hi, boy.
Irma Groenland prefers a tamer way of life on the farm.
My farm is my life.
The chores start early on her 25 acres outside Pretoria, South Africa. Because the sooner the work is done, the sooner she can pursue the passion she thought had been lost forever. Running.
It's part of my life. If I can't run, I don't feel complete.
Irma and daughter Janine are running again, 12 years after the tremors from Parkinson's disease forced Irma to give it up. Diagnosed at just 46 years old, she could no longer run. She also could not write, type, or cut her own food. And at work, she struggled to make presentations to clients.
I would try to stop myself from shaking. So and I realized that people were looking at my shaking or the tremor rather than listening to what I was saying.
10 years of medication provided only limited relief. So Irma underwent deep brain stimulation, or DBS. Electrical impulses are directed from a neurostimulator to specific targets in her brain, helping to control the tremors. She's now been receiving DBS therapy for 2 years.
Devices are no shaking at all.
And then when you turn the device off,
Start shaking immediately. Feel completely helpless.
and then daughter Janine turns the device back on.
Takes a while. This is awesome.
In October, Irma will run the Twin Cities 10 Mile during the Medtronic Twin Cities Marathon weekend. She'll join 19 other Medtronic global champions, all runners who have overcome health challenges with the help of medical technology.
She's my hero. She's always been before Parkinson's. She's such a strong lady.
Before Parkinson's, Irma ran more than 100 marathons, but this race will be different than all the rest.
It's an opportunity to make a difference to people's lives. I think my story is a success story. I can do everyday things again, which I couldn't do before. For me, that's success if I can do what I want to do.
That's incredible. Do you want to say it? I bet.
Yes.
Well, that's why it's important that, we're advancing our technology, and we have a very robust product cadence going forward in terms of continuing to improve the technology. And we shared some of that with Susan, and she's excited about our future roadmap. But it's very, very important that as we do that, as we add complexity, we need to overlay that with simplicity. And we see the Samsung partnership and the tablet and the handset as a way to put very powerful devices in the hands of the patient and the physicians in ways that they can easily reprogram or manage their therapy. And so to have that familiar interface in a nice leather case, it's also very discreet, right? So in the future, Susan will be able to pull that out of her purse, open it up, and everyone will think she's reading her email or reading her texts.
Yeah.
You know, so this is very important to us, and we at Medtronic want to invest our time, energy, and money into the implants, while we can partner with companies like Samsung to provide that right user interface for us.
That's amazing. Incredible solution. And in the keynote session this morning, you announced the solution. So is this publicly available?
Yes, we announced today. There was a press release that went out today. It's already hitting the wires. Susan's already on the wires, and we press released that late morning today, that the Samsung Medtronic patient programming device, which is the one that Jim just showed, is now available. And if you weren't at the keynote, Susan received the very first unit. So she was the recipient of the first product. Yeah.
Oh, that's great.
Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you so much. My understanding is this technology moves beyond just what's been used for the deep brain stimulation therapy. So, Jim, I'd like to turn it over to you. Can you tell us a little bit about how this technology has been used in some of the other innovations from Medtronic?
Yeah, absolutely. So we have a business that's called the pelvic health business, and just like Earl talked about, implantable kind of metal devices that have battery and circuitry in them to be able to control Parkinson's symptoms. We also apply this same technology to nerves at the bottom of the spine for incontinence. And so this is people who have both urinary and fecal incontinence. And so similar, it's the same kind of use case, but with a different therapy fundamentally. And so about a year ago, we essentially announced a similar type of announcement that happened today, but for our InterStim therapy, that treats incontinence. And so the idea, again, and the reason, again, that we partnered with Samsung is very similar, again, to what Earl had talked about, is Medtronic needed to get out of the business of making devices with screens, because we're very good at making these kind of implantable devices. And so let's leverage our engineering expertise in those areas where we can make some unique contributions and really kind of move the ball forward with innovation and technology in that space, and then leverage a company that has essentially that expertise and that the innovation related to mobile devices that have screens on them, right? That piece of it. So that's again a similar use case, and really trying to leverage the capabilities that Samsung brings to the table. And I just want to add, it's a very exact same use case where those patients who get those devices, who have essentially incontinence that can't be treated, with medications, get a device just like this with a communicator that essentially allows them to be able to adjust, that stimulation as well. Earl had mentioned a comment earlier about discrete. You can imagine with a condition like urinary incontinence or fecal incontinence, how critical being discrete is, for those kind of patients. Those conditions, unfortunately, they affect millions of people in the United States and around the world. But people don't talk about it, because there's that stigma, unfortunately, that's with those conditions. And so a lot of those people suffer in silence. And then when they have a device that does provide some treatment to it, they typically want to keep that, confidential. And so that ability for them to be able to pull out something that looks exactly like a smartphone and be able to interact with their therapies, you can imagine, is especially important for people suffering from those kind of conditions. It really, a lot of that really allows for them to maintain their dignity, which is really, really critical for them to feel good about themselves, to be able to and be able to work with their therapy and be able to adjust it and fine tune it, and get back to as much of a normal life as possible.
And Jim, doesn't that extend even to the point of going out versus just staying home for these?
Yes, absolutely. Those patients will sometimes become hermits in their homes, because they'll incontinence is a condition in which they have to go to the bathroom very frequently, and they get very little advance warning. And so therefore, they essentially understand where the bathrooms are on their way to work, on their way to church, on their way to the grocery store, all those different places, and they want to avoid having accidents. And so their world, which used to be very, very big, becomes smaller and smaller and smaller. And so So it's really very fulfilling to actually work on therapies and devices that allow people to kind of return back to their normal lives and such. And so these devices essentially, really, allow. I think Earl had mentioned this in the keynote earlier, but once these devices are implanted in the body, the Samsung handsets and the tablets become the window in which our physicians, nurses, and patients experience their therapy. And so it's really critical to have devices that perform as well as the Samsung devices do.
That's great. Just to move over to the technology side a little bit, you're in the healthcare space, so you must be dealing with security issues and regulatory issues and things like that all the time. Can you talk a little bit about the challenges and how you address those with these types of solutions?
Sure. A lot of our therapies and our devices and our technology is highly regulated because of the kind of safety and the risk piece of it. And so we work very closely with the FDA and other regulatory agencies around the world to make sure these devices are safe and effective. And so you can imagine as you start moving data around, into devices, like a handset, that information really needs to be highly, highly secure. And so, but then we don't necessarily probably want a commercial, handset device to have to be submitted to the FDA as well. And so Medtronic worked for quite a while with the FDA around identifying the hardware and the base kind of operating system and software platform to be a commercial off-the-shelf device, right? And not to be a regulated type of part of the system. Whereas the medical software applications that we developed, that our engineers developed, those clearly are the ones that are regulated and are tested to all the different levels that are required for these kind of applications. And so that strategy, we worked very, very closely with the FDA around doing that, so that we could tap into devices that Samsung makes, and that we can essentially submit our applications and our software applications to the FDA for approval. So it's a nice combination of both commercial and medical, and it's the blend of those two things together. And so we worked quite a bit with the FDA around how to do that.
That's great. So, and then can you tell us a little bit about the decision from Medtronic building their own devices, or at least contracting to build their own devices, moving over to a consumer device, or not a consumer device, but an off-the-shelf device like a Samsung device. Can you talk a little bit about that decision and why Samsung and the partnership that was there with Samsung through the development of these?
Sure. I think some of the main reasons that we chose to partner with Samsung, one was, our reputation is critical. Our brand, right, is, and the reputation that goes with that brand is really important to us. And so we wanted to partner also with a company that also had a very strong reputation on a global basis as well. And so Samsung clearly was in the top five, I think global brands in the world, I believe it is, or at least in the top 7 on the consumer side of things. And so it's a very recognizable brand. And so when you think about that device being that window, into our therapy, for patients and physicians, that Samsung name on there really plays a nice role in being able to support that positive brand perception. So I think that's one key piece of it. The other piece of it is around security, around Knox. There's in these kind of devices, these are essentially dedicated devices. So they're not devices that the patient can use to make a phone call, for example. And so we essentially use a number of components, and we essentially customize these devices so that they're very, very reliably used, to run the medical software applications. But we leverage some key components of Knox to make sure that it's highly secure as well. So if we think about kind of brand awareness, think about security, and then the other piece of it was a very easy to use software user interface. And so people who are familiar with using Android and Samsung devices already, when they start to use these products here, it often becomes very, very familiar to them. And so the learning curve for them to be able to interact with their therapy and with these applications usually is pretty low. So those are the three pieces.
I'm proud to have My products there. If you look at the picture on the screen, it's pretty obvious, isn't it? Right?
Yeah.
You know, I mean,
Our old ones are on the top, yeah.
It kind of looks like the Palm Pilot and the BlackBerry,
Yeah.
you know, before.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's really helping us update our look and feel as
Right,
well.
yeah, here's one of the old ones.
That's the old one.
Correct.
Yeah. And that one can be a little confusing,
Yeah.
right,
Yes.
Susan?
Right.
Where the new one is clear and easy to use.
Yeah, I had a back surgery since my DBS, and I needed to turn my stimulation off before I could go into the operating room. Well, I became a little confused and anxious because of this surgery, and the doctor almost canceled the surgery because I couldn't find out where to turn it off. He had to call the 1-800 number.
1-800 Medtronic, that's right?
Right.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's great. Well, thank you very much. So obviously, security in data at rest and data in transit is very important to these pieces. So I want to move over to you, John. Can you talk a little bit about your role and your mission within Medtronic?
Sure. So I work with, I'm responsible for the Samsung devices across the 4 therapies that use them. And part of that involves, so the successful migration from the proprietary programmers to the new ones. And also, I spend a lot of time in the field working with clinicians to understand their workflows and how we can make the devices work better for them. Okay. And as part of that then is the just what to do with the data you mentioned.
Yes. So can you talk a little bit about the need that you were asked to find a solution for?
Sure. So the therapies will generate patient data, patient reports as PDFs on the devices. And the initial supported method was to take the device to a PC, hook it up with a USB cable, and a clinician doing this, open up multiple windows, drill down to the right folder, copy it to the PC or where they needed it. Now that, as I described that's very daunting for some clinicians who aren't IT experts. And also it's somewhat of a one-to-one because you're connecting that tablet to one device at a time. So we found a need to just make that better, right? So partnering with Samsung, we developed an application that with the device on an internal secure Wi-Fi, and you can see the screen there, all the configuration options. You simply configure a share or some kind of storage on the customer network and the source folder on the tablet. Once it's all configured, there's a widget on the home screen that the clinician just simply clicks the widget and the files will be moved from the tablet to wherever they want them. Now that is the ultimate goal, right? But we found out after the fact that that will start to ease EMR integrations for the customers. And also, when you talk about...
And EMR is?
Sorry, electronic medical records. I apologize for the audience. But also when you talk to IT security, that I talk to a lot, and they have, as Jim mentioned, they have concerns over this being perceived as just a commercial off-the-shelf device, right? But once we have those conversations about how we're mitigating the risks, how we're locking things down, how we're securing the patient data, they're much more open to the adoption. But also with this application, what it does, it allows the customers, if they choose, to set up very pointed network rules to only allow this tablet to talk to this one source, or destination, versus having to broadcast for printers, things like that. So it's much more secure in the long run. And this also drives, in the long run, drives the Wi-Fi adoption, because with these on Wi-Fi, it gives our MDM solution visibility for security.
That's great. And so when you're, obviously you're building on the Samsung device, was there a particular reason that it was Samsung, or can you talk about a little bit about the choice of using a Samsung device for this?
So our Samsung, I won't say local team because it's spread across the nation, but the team that I deal with at Samsung, they have a very good understanding of how the devices are used. They were very, it did take a lot of explanation to deliver, for them to understand what we were trying to accomplish. And they had resources available very quickly, and I think we had, from initial conversations to delivery of the application, was maybe 6 weeks. Wow, very quick.
Wow, that's great. Well, thank you very much. Well, thank you very much for everyone. Now, I wanted to open it up to some questions. I'm sure there are some questions here. If you don't mind, there's a mic right behind you, sir. I'll grab you first. Okay.
Just to be honest, I tried to front load this question, but John wouldn't accept it, so here we go. So I too was touched this morning when we saw the presentation and stuff, and the first thing that came to my mind when I watched the Parkinson is Alzheimer's. So I'm wondering if you're doing any research or similar type technology in the medical field with respect to implants for Alzheimer's and delusion for elder patients.
Yeah, I can take that one. Alzheimer's is a devastating disease, and it's a enormous strain on the patients and the patient's family. It's an enormous health cost. There's so many reasons that we all should be investing in figuring out a way to arrest this progressive, devastating disease or to cure it. There's lots of research going on. In the previous administration, the Brain Initiative was funded through the NIH, and there's hundreds and hundreds of millions of dollars that's flowing into all kinds of research like that. We watch that very carefully. We're very, very interested in all the activity. There have been many very promising therapies for Alzheimer's that have not proven out in the human model. They're very successful in preclinical models that haven't translated well into the human model. So we, as a medical community, either on the pharma side, which Medtronic is not in, we're on the med device side. We're looking for those solutions as well. And there's a lot of promising technologies, coming to bear, from ways to open up the blood-brain barrier and let new therapeutics in, and all kinds of activities. In reference specifically to deep brain stimulation, over the next several years, not yet, I want to be clear, but over the next several years, we're continuing to invest very, very heavily, and we will be launching a device next year that can not only stimulate the appropriate locations in the brain to modulate the movement disorders, but we can also sense, and we can sense simultaneously. And there's this tremendous symphony upon symphony, this orchestra of electrical activity that's going on in the brain that we can detect. And there are things that we call biomarkers that we can respond to. And we will stay focused on deep brain stimulation in the initial periods, in terms of, rather than, in case of Susan, as her meds come on, her symptoms are reduced, and as the meds taper off before her next dosage, her symptoms tend to return, and then next dosage occurs. We can sense a biomarker that says, hey, your symptoms are coming up. We'll stimulate you a little bit more and reduce that symptom. And then as the meds come back on and take over that component, we'll reduce stimulation. And so we can try to keep her in a good zone where she feels good, not just where her symptom is managed, but she also feels better. And we have to prove that. We're regulated. We have to do clinical trials and that kind of thing. I am hopeful that as we do this work and are able to prove these claims, that we'll be able to look for other biomarkers in the brain. And if Alzheimer's is related to electrical activity, because there's other things going on, there's the vascular, I'll call it the plumbing, part of the brain, there's many other, there's chemical parts, but if there's an electrical biomarker that we can find that's related to Alzheimer's, that will be significant. Because the moment you have a biomarker, you can figure out how to interrupt it or modulate it. And if you learn how to interrupt it or modulate it, you can learn how to prevent it, maybe. And those are all if, and I'm not saying that we have anything near at hand. I wish we did. But it's a devastating disease that deserves a lot of attention and investment, and it's getting that. I think I've seen billboards that say the person who will be cured of Alzheimer's is alive today. Yeah. I hope it's me. I want to get Alzheimer's, but if I do, I hope it's me. But I'm getting up there. But I think it is near term in terms of 10 years, 20 years. It's not 100 years. So I think it's coming, and we're doing our part to look hard at it.
I'd like to bounce off what you said and the gentleman asked. About 60% of people with Parkinson's develop a form of Alzheimer's. And when we become what's the word I want to use? The study group.
Sure, absolutely. So there is a dementia component that can be related to Parkinson's. It's not always related because it is a progressive disease. But you're right, if that Parkinson's-related dementia is associated with Alzheimer's, if there's a connection, but either one of them, we'd be very happy to go after. The biomarker I was referring to a moment ago is related to movement disorder, the movement symptoms, the tremor, for example. But I'd love to nail that one down, check it off, and then go on to the next one and the next one. And I think we're opening up a window into the brain that is unique and interesting. Yes, and that window kind of shows up on the Samsung, device in terms of how it represents itself. So we're excited by the future. I couldn't be more excited about the opportunities that are before us at Medtronic in this space. So we'll keep working hard for both of us.
Thank you.
That's a great answer, very hopeful answer. Thank you for the question. That was a great question. So, another one?
Yeah, sure. I was curious, yesterday I attended your presentation yesterday also, and you mentioned about the sort of the bridge device that you have between the phone and the implanted device. Yes.
Yeah.
And you said eventually you might actually, make your implanted operate on a Bluetooth, so that way it can communicate with the phone directly. I was just curious if FCC has actually allocated a M-band band right below the Wi-Fi band, 2.3 gigahertz, for medical body area network type of devices, exclusively for medical applications. I was curious if you have any plans to use that band instead of, let's say, Bluetooth or Wi-Fi. Obviously, both are congested bands.
Yeah, no, it's a great question. And so today, the communication band that we have is based on a technology that's been around for decades, fundamentally. We actually have on the cardiac side of our business, we actually have a pacemaker, an implantable cardiac pacemaker that actually uses Bluetooth telemetry, we call it, to be able to communicate out. And so therefore they would not need this device. They can go directly to a phone or a handset or a tablet. So part of Medtronic has already made that step as well. But we also, a number of years ago, it was probably 10 or 15 years ago, we actually worked with the worldwide radio kind of regulatory agencies and established there's a mixed band, a medical implant communication system band, that essentially is established worldwide, for I would say medium range communication. And I don't know if that's the exact one that you're talking about. I don't know the exact frequency of that one, but that's been around for probably 10 or 15 years now, and really allows for more than a couple inch range. It allows for much further. And there's some medical devices out there that do use that already, but that's not Bluetooth, fundamentally. So I think that's the opportunity. I think what you're pointing out is for us to, just like we're not a company that makes that's really great at making devices with screens. There's likely, it could be, and we have some very good radio engineers, in our company as well that work within the body, and that work to try to get that signal outside of and through the skin, right, and out into an outside device. But I think how can we get to things that are being used in the commercial, area already, whether that's current versions of Bluetooth or future ones as well, that's actually the opportunity for us. Because these devices, are just, again, another level of complexity, that we would love to simplify going forward. So I think right now we've got a Bluetooth cardiac pacemaker that's already available on the market, and so that's a technology that we can look to leverage, within the devices that we work on, and I'm sure there's some radio frequency engineers internally that are also keeping an eye on where are things going in the broad commercial market to try to stay ahead of that as well.
Okay, great. Thank you. I just have a quick question about the comment you made earlier about how FDA only regulates your medical app on the phone and doesn't care about the OS or the phone itself. Could you just elaborate a little?
Yeah, I wouldn't say they don't care about the OS. What they do is they actually have a published guidance, and you can go to the FDA website, and they have a guidance around using commercial off-the-shelf devices. And so they care about it. They want to make sure that companies who do that essentially are understanding the risks of doing so. And is it there may be some applications which have a very high risk profile, if something goes wrong, in which using a commercial off-the-shelf device does not make sense. And then there's a lot of devices or a lot of use cases or applications in which it can make sense. And so they actually provide some nice guidance, based on conversations that they've had with Medtronic and other companies, other medical device companies, to provide insights into people who want to move into that space and be able to do that. So I think they published that. I know they did an update recently in the last, I think, few months. And so they have a digital health kind of center, as part of the FDA, and have recognized all of the changes that are going on in the consumer side of the world are now starting to come and weave themselves in through the kind of medical device applications as well. And so they've tried to, I think, stay in front of that, and really help companies get solutions that are safe and effective and scalable, and allows us to be able to leverage these technologies.
Thank you.
Yeah.
All right, thank you. Any other questions? I think we have time for one more.
Two more.
We get two, as long as Hamshi's quick.
I'm curious to know, the device implanted, is it battery operated, I assume, but how long is the battery life? And if it is dead, does it mean require surgery to take it out and replace it?
Yeah, no, it's a good question. And our group within Medtronic, we have two types of battery technologies. One is what we call a primary cell. It's just a kind of regular lithium kind of based kind of battery chemistry that essentially gets implanted with the device. It's inside the titanium can of the device, and then it'll run, for again, a battery lasts as long as, it's got electrons to be able to provide, to the circuitry. So if somebody's using a lot of current, essentially, and electricity then it'll drain faster, of course, versus someone who's not using as much, it'll drain slower. So we have devices that can, last 3 or 4 years on the short end, and all the way up to, even up to, probably with those primary cell devices could last maybe 7 or 8 years, on the long end. It all depends on how much they're used. But we also have then some very proprietary rechargeable batteries as well, and that's actually a core competence of Medtronic, that we actually make our own rechargeable batteries. And so those are also used in a number of our therapies. And so those devices then, patients will essentially, be living their lives, and then every week or every 2 weeks or every 3 weeks, they'll essentially have a recharger device that essentially couples the electricity, from a external recharger into the implantable device. And then those devices, could last, up to 15 years, for example, before we recommend that, they get replaced. And so how once these batteries are essentially completed, whether it's a primary cell battery or a rechargeable battery, then the device is actually, the patients can find out how good their battery is using their Samsung patient programmer. It'll give them a status on how their implantable battery is. And then they'll come into their clinic typically on a regular basis, talk to their doctor, and then they'll get rescheduled for a surgery to come in, and then what they'll do is they'll make a little incision, right
here.
And then be able to take the device out. They usually leave the wire in if it's still functioning effectively, and then they connect on another new device on at that time. Great, yeah.
Thank you, Medtronic team, and Susan for being here. So now that you have these secure Samsung devices in the hands of patients, what's your vision, long-term vision, about how you can leverage this connected smartphones to engage with your patients outside of the application that they're using?
Sure. I'll take a run at that. You can imagine if all we were going to be doing is putting a single therapy app on a handset, this is probably a little overkill, right? Fundamentally. So this is a great platform for us, actually, is to add other applications. For example, things that can track symptoms. Sometimes we may not have sensors in all of our devices yet, and so in order for patients and physicians, their physicians to understand, hey, do I have improvement in my symptoms? You have to measure those symptoms. And so you can imagine, apps that can help do that. They can ask questions of patients. They can say, how many incontinence symptoms did you have today? What is your pain like today? Those kinds of questions that can make a big difference in understanding, is the device therapy working really well, or does it need to be adjusted and fine-tuned? Those kinds of things. So you can imagine that. You can imagine also you leveraging the connectivity in these implantable devices in kind of the telehealth, telemedicine space to be able to, in the future, be able to leverage these devices so that clinics and physicians can know how our device is set, and if Susan adjusts some things, that information potentially could get shared back to her clinic in a kind of wireless, seamless manner. So that's where I think it's really exciting to talk and to walk around at the developers conference here, is to get ideas around how can that blend, of both B2B and also consumer-based applications. How could those applications actually apply in our space here, and how do we start leveraging the power that you all have been leveraging for years now, based on devices like this? That's really the exciting frontier that's in front of us.
And I think over time too, and we can't do it today, but as we improve that connectivity and collect that objective data from patients and collect that data and store that, we can start to use AI, ML, and look for patterns that can help lead to faster, better optimization of therapy for patients, or look for other markers in the brain as well. So there's a lot of opportunity that's out there that we're not to yet. We're still very focused on the here and now.
And then one last thing to add around engagement is sharing data back to the patient themselves, right? If they're going to enter data in, or that data is inside of them, there's some, I think, great opportunities and ideas around how can we take that information and be able to allow the patient to have direct access to some of their own healthcare data that the implantable device is associated with. So I think that to me, when you think about engagement, that's really around knowledge, that's around empowerment, that's having them understand more about their condition, and that's a very effective way for people to engage in their disease, in their condition, and their treatment.
That's great. Well, thank you. I think we've run over time. So, yeah, Jim, Earl, John, thank you so much for coming. What you do is heartwarming and inspiring. And Susan, thank you so much for coming. It's been such a pleasure to meet you, and thank you so much for sharing your story. So, yeah.